0240 hours. The digital horizon of the regional early warning system turns a violent shade of crimson. This is not a drill. 635 Jaren-2 loitering munitions are currently saturating the thermal sensors of the defense grid, creating a kinetic cloud designed for one purpose: total systemic overwhelm. High above 295 millisecond strategic bombers have already released 38 Kh-101 cruise missiles from the Caspian launch box. Their internal guidance systems are locked onto the critical nodes of the power infrastructure. The objective of the strike is clear: to plunge a nation of millions into a silent, freezing void. But in this simulation, the hunter becomes the prey before the first missile finds its mark. As the Russian Air Force focuses its entire C4ISR architecture on the saturation of the front line, a silent shadow slips through the gaps of the S-400 radar nets. Hundreds of kilometers behind the contact line in the industrial heart of Stavropol, the air is thick with the scent of chemicals and heavy machinery. The Stavrolen petrochemical plant, Russia's second largest producer of polymers, the very raw material for drone bodies and military insulation, continues its rhythmic pulse, unaware that its own internal pressure is about to be turned against it. A Liuti long-range kamikaze drone constructed from radar-absorbent composites makes its final terminal dive. It doesn't aim for the barracks or the warehouses, it targets the ethylene cracking unit. At 0315, the physics of an exothermic reaction takes over. A direct hit ignites a high-pressure gas separation workshop, triggering a chain reaction that transforms one of the Federation's most vital industrial assets into a 500-meter pillar of fire. The night sky over Budyonnovsk is no longer dark. It is a searing, artificial orange that can be seen from low Earth orbit. This is the beginning of the doctrine of symmetric retaliation. While the missiles from the Caspian were still in mid-flight, the Ukrainian General Staff did not just defend, they amputated. From the burning petrochemical vats in the north to the vital energy arteries in the south at Taman port, the Russian war machine's nervous system is being severed. The safe motherland myth, a cornerstone of the Kremlin's domestic stability, has just evaporated in a cloud of chemical smoke. This is no longer a localized operation. This is a simulated collapse of the strategic rear. The fire started in Odessa, has traveled through the wind, and tonight it has come home to roost. To understand why the night sky over Stavropol is burning, we must rewind the simulation timeline by 11 days to the cold gray waters of the Black Sea on December 12th. The catalyst for this entire operational cascade was not land-based but maritime. It centered on the port of Kornomorsk in Odessa, a critical node for global food security. A Russian missile strike targeted the bulk carrier Chen-T, a civilian vessel owned by a company based in NATO member Turkey, anchored for purely commercial purposes, carrying humanitarian aid. The kinetic impact set the ship's deck ablaze, damaging the bridge and lifeboats. In total, reports indicate 3 Turkish vessels were compromised during this period. Strategically, this was more than a tactical error. It was a calculated attempt to enforce a maritime chokehold, rendering Ukraine's grain corridor inoperable through the projection of fear onto international shipping lines. It was a direct challenge to the principle of freedom of navigation in international waters. For the strategic planners in Kiev, this attack on neutral NATO-affiliated commercial shipping was the final data point needed to confirm a critical shift in doctrine. The previous approach of purely defensive posturing around their own ports was deemed insufficient against an adversary willing to target third-party civilian infrastructure. The response was the immediate formulation of the symmetric retaliation doctrine. The operational logic established was stark and binary. If the Black Sea is rendered unsafe for ships entering Ukrainian grain terminals, it must simultaneously become equally unsafe for tankers exiting Russian oil terminals. This was the death of the diplomatic containment strategy in the maritime domain. The rules of engagement had been unilaterally rewritten. The burning deck of the Chen-T became the justification for targeting the financial arteries of the Federation. The subsequent December 20th strike on Odessa port infrastructure, resulting in significant civilian casualties and structural damage, only cemented this resolve. The stage was set. The strikes on Russian soil that followed were not random acts of desperation, but a precisely calibrated tit-for-tat strategic reflex, designed to impose an unacceptable economic cost for continued maritime aggression. The clock continues to tick toward the total collapse of the regional energy grid as the Russian Federation initiates Operation Saturation. This is not a precision strike in the traditional sense, it is a mathematical assault on the laws of probability. The Russian General Staff deployed a multi-vector strike package consisting of 635 Geran, 2 loitering munitions, and 38 Kh-101 cruise missiles launched in synchronized waves from the Caspian Sea and Arctic regions. The strategic intent is to create what military analysts call a kinetic cloud, a density of targets so high that the defender's C-4 ISR systems and interceptor stockpiles are physically incapable of addressing every threat simultaneously. Each Kh-101 cruise missile, a high-cost asset featuring radar-absorbent materials and terrain-following guidance, is hidden within a swarm of low-cost Geran drones. These drones, though slow and noisy, serve a critical purpose in the logic of attrition. Every single drone detected on a radar screen demands a response. To ignore a drone is to risk a hit on a transformer station or a substation. To engage it is to expend $1 million interceptor from a Patriot PAC-3 or an IRIS-T battery. The Russian strategy is built on this very imbalance, using expendable mass to bleed the high-tech defense systems of their most precious resource, ammunition. The simulation shows the thermal signatures of the two 95 milliseconds bombers as they bank away after release their mission of fire and forget accomplished. As the missiles enter Ukrainian airspace, the air defense network is forced into a state of maximum saturation. Radar operators face a screen filled with hundreds of blinking icons, a digital blizzard designed to induce decision-making paralysis. The objective is to achieve a breakthrough where the sheer volume of incoming projectiles exceeds the number of available firing channels in the local defense batteries. While the primary focus is the destruction of the energy infrastructure in Kiev and western regions, the ultimate goal is psychological. By targeting the electrical heart of the country during the darkest, coldest days of December, the operation seeks to induce a state of social hypothermia. The logic is cold and calculated. A civilian population without light, heat, or water is a population that may eventually demand an end to the conflict at any cost. This is the ultimate what-if of the Russian gambit, a gamble that the physical darkness of a winter night can break the political resolve of a nation. Yet as the simulation progresses, we see that this massive expenditure of resources left a fatal gap in the Federation's own armor, a gap that the symmetric retaliation was already beginning to exploit. The physical consequences of the saturation strike manifest with brutal efficiency. In the capital and across the southern regions, the electrical heartbeat of the city flatlines. As the mercury plunges to minus 15 degrees Celsius, the urban environment undergoes a terrifying phase transition. Without the constant flow of heated water from centralized thermal plants, the thermal inertia of massive Soviet-era apartment blocks begins to dissipate. Within hours, the temperature inside these concrete shells drops toward the dew point, turning homes into refrigerators. This is the reality of infrastructure warfare, where the weapon is not just the missile, but the physics of the environment itself. Water in the pipes begins to expand as it freezes, threatening a systemic burst that could take months to repair. In the darkness, the only light comes from the flickering silhouettes of portable stoves and the blue glow of battery-powered radios. At least 3 civilian fatalities are recorded in the immediate aftermath, but the true toll is measured in the silent struggle of millions attempting to maintain core body temperatures in the freezing dark. This is the social hypothermia envisioned by the planners, a calculated attempt to force a political surrender by weaponizing the basic human need for warmth. However, in this simulation, the Russian General Staff made a fatal miscalculation regarding the psychological elasticity of the population. Instead of triggering a collapse in morale, the darkness acts as a signal flare for the Ukrainian high command. The suffering of the civilian population is not viewed as a reason to capitulate, but as the final moral and strategic clearance required for a full-scale asymmetric response. The silence in the streets of Kiev is mirrored by an intense, focused activity within the underground command centers of the GUR. While the Russian military remains fixated on the success of their saturation wave, celebrating the darkness they have imposed, they have neglected their own strategic depth. Every radar system, every S-400 battery, and every electronic warfare unit in the western Russian districts has been dialed to its maximum frequency, focused entirely on the Ukrainian border. This total concentration of defensive assets created a tunnel vision effect. By committing every resource to the destruction of the Ukrainian grid, the Federation inadvertently bared its own throat. The night of December 23rd was not the end of the Ukrainian winter. It was the moment the Ukrainian General Staff launched the drones that had been waiting in the shadows, ready to strike the industrial heart of the aggressor. as the Russian S-400 and Pantsir S-1 batteries along the border are fully occupied with tracking decoys and frontline sorties, a different class of predator enters the simulation. These are the silent infiltrators, Ukraine's long-range kamikaze drones such as the Lyuty and the Beaver. These machines are the embodiment of asymmetric warfare designed specifically to exploit the physical limitations of even the most advanced integrated air defense systems. The primary advantage of these drones lies in their material science. Unlike traditional cruise missiles or aircraft, which utilize significant amounts of metal in their airframes, these drones are constructed primarily from carbon fiber and fiberglass composites. In the language of electromagnetic physics, this drastically reduces their radar cross-section, or RCS. To a high-frequency search radar, a drone with a 4-meter wingspan made of these polymers can appear no larger than a migratory bird. When combined with a low-power internal combustion engine that produces a minimal thermal signature, these drones become nearly invisible to the infrared, and radar sensors optimized for detecting high-speed, high-heat jet engines. Furthermore, the Ukrainian flight profiles utilize a technique known as nap of the earth flying. By maintaining an altitude of less than 50 meters, the drones stay below the radar horizon, the physical point where the curvature of the Earth and terrestrial obstacles like hills or forests block the radar's line of sight. While the Russian short blanket defense is stretched thin to protect Moscow and the active front, the vast industrial corridors of the interior are left with significant gaps in low-altitude coverage. In this simulation, the drones do not fly in a straight line. They utilize pre-programmed multi-point GPS and inertial guidance waypoints that zigzag through these blind corridors. They navigate around known air defense sites, moving silently through the Russian night. They are not looking for a fight. They are looking for a weakness. Their destination is hundreds of kilometers behind the lines in the deep strategic rear. By the time the acoustic sensors or visual observers on the ground hear the low hum of the engines, the drones have already entered their terminal dive phase. The Russian C-4 ISR network, designed for a conventional high-intensity conflict at the borders, proves physically incapable of defending against a low observable, low-altitude, and highly distributed threat emerging from within its own airspace. The simulation now centers on a specific coordinate in the Stavropol region, the Stavrolen petrochemical plant. To the casual observer, this is merely a sprawling industrial complex of pipes and cooling towers. To a strategic analyst, it is the kitchen of the war machine. This facility is Russia's second largest producer of high-density polyethylene, and polymers, the fundamental building blocks of modern military hardware. In the age of asymmetric warfare, the front line is not just where the tanks are, it is where the materials to build them are synthesized. The choice of this target is a masterclass in economic surgery. Modern unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs like those used in the saturation strikes against Kiev, rely on carbon fiber and polymer matrix composites for their airframes. The insulation for advanced munitions, the internal components of armored vehicle electronics, and even the specialized plastic resins used in soldier equipment all trace their origins back to the massive ethylene cracking units and gas separation workshops of Stavrolen. By striking these specific nodes, the operation bypasses the military's outer shell and strikes directly at its regenerative capacity. The kinetic energy of the drone impact is secondary to the chemical energy it releases. Ethylene cracking involves heating hydrocarbons to extreme temperatures under immense pressure. When a drone penetrates the specialized containment vessels, it does not just cause a fire, it triggers a catastrophic failure of the entire thermal management system. The resulting fireball, verified by multispectral satellite imagery, indicates a total loss of the most critical workshops. This is not a temporary halt in production that can be bypassed with a generator. It is a systemic disruption of the raw material supply chain. The strategic implications are quantifiable. Intelligence estimates suggest that the shutdown of the Stavrolen facility could result in a 20% reduction in the Federation's domestic UAV production capacity over the next 6 to 12 months. Because these polymers are specialized, they cannot be easily substituted or imported under the current sanctions regime. The fire at Budianovsk has effectively destroyed not just the weapons of today, but the ammunition of tomorrow. While the Russian military celebrates the darkness in Ukraine, they are beginning to realize that their own future is going up in a cloud of toxic polymer-scented smoke. This is an industrial heart attack, delivered with surgical precision, proving that in a globalized conflict, the factory is as vulnerable as the trench. As the industrial fires in Stavropol cast a long, toxic shadow over the Federation's manufacturing sector, the simulation shifts its focus south to the strategic junction of the Kerch Strait. Here lies the Taman Neftegas Terminal, one of the most significant gateways for the Federation's energy exports in the Black Sea region. This facility is not just a collection of storage tanks. It is a vital financial valve through which liquefied petroleum, gas, crude oil, and refined fuel products flow to the global markets of Asia and the global south. It is quite literally the money tap that fuels the operational costs of the ongoing conflict. In a direct response to the bombardment of the Ukrainian electrical grid, the symmetric retaliation doctrine targets the financial spine of the adversary. The logic is as cold as the winter air. If a nation is to be plunged into darkness and cold, the resources used to fund that aggression must be physically incinerated. Ukrainian long-range drones, following the same low-altitude radar-evading profiles used in the Stavrolen strike, converged on the Taman terminal under the cover of the same chaotic night. The targets were selected for maximum systemic disruption: the high-capacity fuel storage tanks, the specialized filling stations, and the manifold pipeline infrastructure that connects the land-based reserves to the awaiting tankers. When the drones impact these pressurized vessels, the result is a catastrophic breach of containment. The physical reality of an oil terminal fire is that it cannot be extinguished by conventional means once it reaches a certain thermal threshold. The heat becomes so intense that it prevents fire crews from approaching, and the burning hydrocarbons create a self-sustaining inferno that must simply be allowed to consume all available fuel. The technical implication of this strike extends far beyond the physical destruction of the tanks. By demonstrating that the Taman terminal, and by extension the nearby port of Novorossiysk, is within the consistent striking range of asymmetric assets, the simulation records a massive spike in maritime insurance premiums. International shipping companies and insurers now view the northeastern Black Sea not as a commercial zone, but as a kinetic dead zone. This is the ultimate reversal of energy blackmail. While one side attempted to cut off the electricity of a civilian population, the other physically shut off the revenue stream required to sustain the war machine. The Taman terminal is now a bottleneck, a scorched monument to strategic blindness. For the global markets, the message is undeniable: the stability of the Federation's energy exports is an illusion that evaporated the moment the first drone hit the pressure valves at Taman. While the industrial and energy hubs burn in the periphery, the simulation records a seismic shift in the psychological center of gravity, Moscow. On December 22nd, just 24 hours before the massive kinetic exchange, the illusion of the safe rear was shattered by a single high-intensity blast in the heart of the capital. A high-ranking military officer, a key figure in the logistical planning of the winter campaign, was neutralized when a sophisticated improvised explosive device IED detonated beneath his vehicle in a high-security residential district. The technical execution of this hit suggests a profound penetration of the Federation's internal security apparatus. This was not a random act of street violence, it was a surgical removal of a high-value target, HVT, in a zone supposedly under the constant surveillance of the FSB and specialized counterintelligence units. The device used, likely a directional-shaped charge, was designed to focus the kinetic energy upward through the reinforced floor of the vehicle, ensuring a lethal outcome while minimizing collateral damage to the surrounding architecture. This level of precision indicates a deep-seated intelligence failure where the movement patterns, security protocols, and vehicle vulnerabilities of the elite were mapped with terrifying accuracy. The strategic significance of this assassination outweighs the loss of 1,000 soldiers on the front line. It signals to the administration and the oligarchic elite that the conflict is no longer a distant news segment played on television. It is an immediate physical reality on their own doorsteps. The psychological profile of the Moscow bureaucracy has shifted from detached observation to acute personal survivalism. The question echoing through the corridors of power is no longer how do we win, but who is next? This fragmentation of security creates a paranoia multiplier. When the internal intelligence services prove incapable of protecting their own leadership in the capital, resources must be diverted from the front line to provide internal security. Every agent assigned to guard a bureaucrat is an agent not monitoring a sabotage cell or an industrial node. The safe motherland myth, the primary promise made to the urban elite in exchange for their silence, has been incinerated. The ghost in the capital is the realization that in a modern asymmetric war, there are no front lines, only a series of vulnerable points waiting to be exploited. While the administrative center of the Federation grapples with the psychological fallout of the capital assassination, the physical arteries of the state are being systematically severed thousands of kilometers from the contact line. In this simulation, the focus shifts to the Perm region and the expansive Siberian rail corridors. Modern military logistics are fundamentally reliant on the rail network, what strategic analysts call the kinetic veins of the war machine. Unlike road transport, which is flexible but low capacity, the railway system allows for the high-volume just-in-time delivery of heavy armor, artillery shells, and refined fuel to the front. However, this reliance on fixed infrastructure creates a massive, indefensible surface area. The technical vulnerability of the rail system lies in its centralized control nodes, the signaling and relay cabinets. These unassuming boxes, which manage the complex SCADA, supervisory control, and data acquisition systems of the tracks, are the nervous system of the railway. Sabotage directed at these points does not require heavy explosives. A simple incendiary device can paralyze hundreds of kilometers of track by forcing the entire system into a fail-safe shutdown mode. In the Perm region, images of military cargo trains and fuel tankers engulfed in flames at isolated stations indicate that the arm of the resistance or specialized GUR sabotage cells reaches far beyond the expected theater of operations. The result is a cascading logistic paralysis. When the kinetic veins are blocked, the military is forced to divert civilian fuel reserves to maintain the mobility of the frontline units. This creates a Mad Max scenario within the civilian population, particularly in high-tension zones like Crimea and southern Russia. The simulation records the total exhaustion of fuel at commercial gas stations. In cities like Yalta, the social contract has begun to fray. Under the cover of darkness, the population has turned to fuel scavenging, siphoning gasoline from parked vehicles to maintain the operation of private generators and essential transport. The psychological impact of seeing kilometer-long queues at gas stations in a global petroleum superpower is profound. It represents a fundamental shaking of public confidence in the administration's ability to provide the basic necessities of modern life. When a state can no longer secure its own energy for its citizens, the perception of its strength evaporates. The knife of logistics, which was already walking on its edge, has finally broken. The Federation is now facing an internal crisis where the struggle for a liter of fuel on a street in Crimea is just as critical to the outcome of the conflict as the struggle for a trench on the front line. The simulation reaches its final analytical phase as the data from the night of December 23rd is processed through the lens of global geopolitics. The primary conclusion drawn by international observers is the exposure of the short blanket defense paradox. In military geometry, no matter how advanced a system like the S-400 may be, it is limited by the physical laws of density and coverage. When a nation possesses a vast geographic expanse, it cannot protect every high-value industrial node while simultaneously maintaining a dense defensive screen at the front and around the capital. By attempting to cover the head, Moscow, and the military offensive, the Federation left its industrial and energy feet exposed to the freezing wind of asymmetric strikes. The global shockwaves are felt most acutely in the financial markets and diplomatic chambers. According to simulated market data, the damage to the Stavrolen facility and the Taman terminal triggered a sudden volatile spike in energy futures and maritime insurance. The Black Sea is no longer viewed as a manageable risk. It has been reclassified as a high-intensity combat zone for commercial shipping. This night has demonstrated that in the modern era, the distance from the front line is a meaningless metric. The industrial heart of a superpower is only as safe as its weakest radar link. From a strategic standpoint, the symmetric retaliation has redefined the leverage at the peace talk table. The perception of the Federation as an invulnerable paper tiger in its own strategic depth has been broadcast to the world in high-definition infrared. The night Russia tried to plunge its neighbor into darkness was the same night it set its own industrial future ablaze. The tactical duel of December 23rd proves that the physics of war is increasingly favoring the agile, the precise, and the asymmetric over the massive and the centralized. As we zoom out from the burning pipelines and the dark streets of the capital, the final lesson of this simulation becomes clear. You cannot weaponize the environment against the population without expecting the environment to be weaponized in return. The wind of conflict does not blow in only one direction. It carries the sparks of the fire back to the house of the one who lit it. The special operation has evolved into an existential crisis of geography and logistics, leaving a once unquestioned power struggling to defend its own internal stability. This concludes the strategic simulation of the December 23rd escalation. This content was generated using advanced AI modeling to explore what-if military scenarios based on available geopolitical data and technical specifications. It is intended for educational and analytical purposes only. Please note that this is an AI simulated reconstruction and does not represent 100% accurate factual reporting or official government statements. In the complexity of modern conflict, the only certainty is change. What do you think about this tactical shift? Share your analysis in the comments below.